Okay, we're now doing 110, and we're looking at the second half of Unit 4, which is the first unit of psychoacoustics. And last week we talked about thresholds, we talked about biases, we went over Herb and Mrs. McGillicuddy and all that stuff, and we talked about, let's see, what else can I lie about? Oh, we talked about minimal audible pressure and minimal audible field. I think we got down to about to the bottom of page 2 in our notes. And so what I'll do is I'll share screen and we'll find those notes themselves right here. And we looked at differential threshold. Be sure to have a passing awareness as to what this is, okay? Again, just a tad of review here, but differential threshold, you already hear the sound, and we're looking at what's the smallest change you'd need to make in order for you to notice a change. You could make a change in intensity, you could make a change in frequency, you could make a change in duration. But we don't really care that much about that stuff. We're more concerned about absolute threshold. And that's the softest that a listener can detect. In other words, the presence versus the absence of a signal. And that's what we are doing in routine audiometry. And that word threshold always uses the Greek letter theta. And theta is a circle with a line through it. And just to be funny here, I'll draw it and hold it up so you can see. Because this is a short form for writing the word threshold. And I'll just hold this up. There you go. That's the Greek letter for threshold. TH with no voice. And it's just that whenever you see that symbol in our field, that's what they're talking about. Threshold for right ear, threshold for left ear. And we said last week that a client is always listening to a signal that's buried in some noise. And we said the noise doesn't have to just be physical noise. It's any crap that interferes. One's internal biases and anything like that. And then we brought up last week listening to something like this. Okay, if you heard a tone at 50, it would be easy to tell yes if the tone was present and no if the tone was absent, because the tone is well above your hearing thresholds. If you can hear down to 0 and the tone is always either presented at 50 or absent, all of your responses will fall in true positives and true negatives. That is, every time the tone is present, you'll say yes, and every time the tone is absent, you'll say no. But look at the next slide. If the tone is 5 dB, that's when you're going to start squinting and you're going to lose confidence. Sometimes when the tone is present, you're going to say yes. Sometimes when the tone is absent, you'll truly say no. But you will also have mistakes. And when the tone is absent, you might raise a hand. And when the tone is present, you might keep the hand down. Because look, the sound is soft. It's only 5 dB. You can barely hear it. And that's what our clients are going through when we test their hearing. And that's why this slide here is just kind of strange, but look at it this way, okay? Let's pretend this is called the actual degree of sensation. Let's just call that the degree of hair cell sensation in your inner ear when you're hearing a tone. And look at the vertical axis, that's the percent of times. Now look at the bottom one here. Every time the tone is absent, you'll have some degree of hair cell sensation because you're alive, because your body's tingling and you're waiting. But every time the tone is present, you'll have more, and that's the dotted line. And that's if the sound is good and loud. But when the sound gets soft, you have lesser of a degree of sensation, and sometimes you're making mistakes. Look at the crossover. And when the tone is really soft, look at the amount of crossover here. That's what I mean. This area where my cursor is drawing, that's the area of false positives and false negatives, because you're not sure. Okay, that's all that is. Don't worry about this slide. Now, this one here is talking about Herb and Mrs. McGillicuddy. Look at this. When there's no tone, you've got some degree of hair cell sensation. When the tone is present, you have more. And when the sound is soft, of course, you've got an intersection. But here's Herb. He's the chicken. His internal rule or criteria is, I want to be sure I'm hearing before I raise my hand. And Mrs. McGillicuddy, the first grade school teacher who's now retired with her white gloves and her purse, who loves to give tests, her bias, she's like the Las Vegas gambler. She's like, hey man, she's raising her hand even when you haven't pushed the button. You may end up saying to her, I haven't touched anything. Wait till you're a little bit more sure, okay? And as we said last week, your job as a clinician is to pull Herb and Mrs. McGillicuddy to the center, depending on his or her biases. And that's kind of the general psychoacoustics when it comes to hearing thresholds. So again, Herb would be the chicken. He wants more loudness to be sure. Mrs. McGillicuddy, she needs less neural sensation in order for her to decide to say yes. So people have, the tone can be present or the tone can be absent, but there's also the other dimension, and that's the person's decision basis to say yes or to say no. And your decisions can be based on biases. Biases toward false positives, biases toward false negatives. False negatives are going to make your hearing levels look worse than they really are. False positives are going to make your thresholds tend to look a little better than they really are. Wow, there's a couple of really cool birds right outside here. They're kind of related to woodpeckers. I don't remember the name, but my better half would know exactly what. Anyway, cool. All right. So moving on, you can have type 1 errors, type 2 errors, and the type 1 error is you're pregnant, and of course the guy isn't. And the type 2 error would be the false negative, saying you're not pregnant. Anyhow. Now we move, and I'm going to cover MAF and MAP again because I think these are very important concepts before we jump off and move on, okay? Minimal audible field and minimal audible pressure. So we've covered page 1 in our notes, and we'll move on down toward page 2, all of this stuff. Be sure to put a star by method of limits. Be sure to put a star by knowing the definition of bias. Okay? Bias being the difference between what you do hear and what you decide to say you hear. The difference between what someone can answer versus what someone does answer. Okay? Very important concept. Another one here, method of limits. Have that defined. Both of those things define the method of limits. And how do we do the method of limits? We use the ascending-descending approach, the Hewson-Westlake approach. So have those definitions down. That's very important, okay? And we're reviewing the ascending, descending. We descend in steps of 10, the client until he or she doesn't hear, and then we ascend in steps of 5 until the person says he or she does hear. And 2 ascending responses at the same decibel level defines threshold. And that's now you've tested 1,000 hertz for the right ear. Now do 2,000 hertz for the right ear. The same method. Now do 4,000 hertz threshold seeking for the right ear. And so on. 8. And then 125, 250, 500. And usually 1,000 again to make sure you've got the same thing. Then left ear. And now you've just tested air conduction. Hearing testing is another course, but this course is describing the underlying bases beneath. Minimal audible field. Very important concept. Let's go right to it. Minimal audible field. Look at the curve. Note the shape. Minimal audible field is simply the softest it took to hear all the different frequencies at 1 meter distance from a speaker with 2 ears. You all defined this on your midterm as what was 0 dB SPL. And 0 dB SPL was the softest it took to hear a 1,000 hertz tone at 1 meter distance from a speaker with 2 ears. Okay, that's okay, but now if you play the same game at other frequencies, what's the softest it took to hear a 2000 hertz tone at 1 meter distance from a speaker with 2 ears, and a 4000 hertz tone in the same way, and the 500 hertz tone in the same listening conditions? And you would end up with different decibels. And that's what this is showing you. That various investigators all looked at the same thing and they all found similar trends. And those trends were, okay, we talked about this from Unit 2, but if you play that same game across all the other frequencies, you're going to end up with a minimal audible field. Oh, by the way, the slides that I just jumped over are simply dB versus dB SPL, and you know that from Unit 2. We've covered that already, so bypassing it. Minimal audible field, the softest level required to just barely hear all the different frequencies at 1 meter distance from a speaker with 2 ears. And notice 1000 there, we called that 0. But if you now look at what happens with 500 hertz, look at my cursor here. I'm at about 5. And 250 hertz, I'm at about 15, 20. And 125 hertz, it took me like 40 decibels to just barely hear that. And look at the real sweet spot where my cursor is. It takes less than 0. In other words, the pressure will be less than 0.0002 dynes per centimeter squared. So you can have sounds less than 0. So that's minimal audible field, but that's notice with 2 ears, highlighting with 2 ears. We don't test hearing in a sound field at 1 meter distance from a speaker. On the contrary, we put headphones on. And when you put a headphone on, you're listening to 1 ear at a time. And that's when you get minimal audible pressure. MAP. That's the softest decibels, SPL, that it took to hear with 1 ear under a headphone, instead of at 1 meter distance from a speaker with 2 ears. So MAP, notice the little bump over here, that's because you've plugged up the ear with a headphone. And where do these curves come from? Well, they come from the resonances of the outer and the middle ears. Here's the resonance of your outer ear. Here's the resonance of your middle ear. When you add those two together, which is why I put a plus sign in the center, you get the curves. Okay, and notice though, MAP, you've plugged up the ear, so this red you've really ruined. And that's why you've lost the little bump in the higher frequencies there. Okay, nonetheless, look at the decibel differences between the MAP and MAF. They're about 5 dB. 2 ears are about 5 dB better than 1 ear. Okay, never think a person with 1 ear has a 50% hearing loss. Never think that, okay? If it takes me 40 to hear in this ear and 40 to hear in this ear, binaurally my threshold will be 35. If it takes me 20 to hear here, 20 to hear here, binaurally my threshold will be 15. Okay, 2 ears are about 5 dB better than 1 ear. The thing you lose with 1-eared hearing is directionality of sound. That's where the person who's deaf in 1 ear will experience greatest difficulty. So for children in a classroom who are deaf in 1 ear, preferential seating, that's usually the treatment. Okay? Usually people who are deaf in 1 ear hate hearing aids. They don't want a hearing aid for the ear that's bad. Most people don't. Okay, just realize that. And you'll learn more about that in hearing aids courses. But at any rate, looking over here, this is another picture of minimal audible field. Note how the curve goes below 0 between 2 and 5,000 hertz. Look at that. Notice how it is at 0 for 1,000, because that defines 1,000. That defines 0 dB SPL. What's the softest it took to hear 1,000 hertz tone at 1 meter distance with 2 ears? Now look at MAP. See how MAP is a little bit shorter? Because we usually don't test at 100 hertz and we don't test at 50 hertz. But again, notice that the decibel difference is about 5 dB. essentially. And note where the curves come from. Okay, so very important. Now, if you're looking carefully at this slide, MAP is 0 dB HL. MAP is in dB SPL. Look at the vertical axis. All of it's in dB SPL, but when you take that curve, that little smile that you see on the screen in front of you, that is capital I, capital S, bold-faced, underline, italics. 0 dB on this picture. This picture, look where 0 is, a flat line going across the top. That is this. This is that. Can't emphatically say it any more than that. These differences across the decibels, across the frequencies, are built into your audiometer so that you can call them all 0. So really realize that 0 at 125 is actually about, I don't know, about 40. And 0 at 250, right where my cursor is, that really is about 25, 30. And whoops, and 0 at 1,000 is actually about 10. And 0 at 2,000, right where my cursor is actually about 5. Whatever the differences are, don't memorize the numbers. I don't have them in my head. Just realize that 0 dB HL is your second decibel reference. In other words, dB SPL is the bottom anchor. That's the one for the whole world. dBSPL, 0 dBSPL is the anchor ground reference for machines, for hearing aids, for everything. But people aren't machines. We hear better at some frequencies than at other frequencies. And this MAP shows us that to be true. And MAF shows that to be true. And a dog or a cat would have different shaped MAFs and MAPs, okay? But we're humans, this is us. So dBHL, look at the vertical axis on the side here. That's the reference for human hearing, okay? So there's your second dB reference. Good. Look at our notes now, and where have we come? Oh, it says here duration of sound also tends to affect threshold. Let's read what that word says here. Temporal integration or temporal summation. The longer a sound, the easier it is to hear, but only up to a certain point. Let's see if we can describe that in English. Okay, here's that picture. Duration. Now look at the horizontal axis in milliseconds. In other words, if I presented a sound to you for like 5 milliseconds, like you would have a higher threshold. Look where my cursor is. If I present it to you for 10 milliseconds, your threshold gets better because your nerves have a little bit more time to grab it. If I present it for 20 milliseconds, oh, your threshold gets a little bit better. 50 milliseconds, your threshold gets better. 100 milliseconds, your threshold gets better. 200 milliseconds, okay, now you got it. And then if I present it longer, your threshold doesn't improve anymore. Okay? All this means in English is when you're testing hearing, present the tone for at least a while, like deep. Don't go, okay? You have to hold the tone bar down for at least 200 milliseconds, at least a fifth of a second. Well, any experienced clinician will hold the tone bar for at least a second or two. I mean, deep. Next frequency, deep. Okay, but the word for your body needing a certain amount of time to fully grasp a signal, that's called temporal integration or temporal summation. The longer a sound, the easier it is to hear, but only to a certain point. And that certain point is about 200 milliseconds. Next. Okay, waltzing through. Oh, this is something you're going to look a little bit at in speech audiometry and things like that. It's called, excuse me, performance index functions, PI function. Now, we won't spend a lot of time on this. We'll just kind of look at this briefly and then kind of move on. But let's say threshold at 1,000 hertz is 15 dB HL. Just pretend. If you present, so here, 15, right where the line is. That means if your threshold is 15 at 1,000 hertz, you're going to hear it at 15 dB most of the time. Look where it is, about 75% of the time. Okay, again, I will repeat, if your threshold is, for example, 15 dB HL, if I present the tone at 15 dB HL, you'll likely, most of the time, you're going to say yes. In other words, when I descend until you don't hear it and ascend until you do hear it, usually you're going to hear it at 15, if your threshold is 15. Okay? Not always. There may be a time when you swallow or something, and for some reason you don't, but usually you do. If I presented the tone at 10, look at this, you'll likely not hear it. But if I present the tone at 20, you'll almost always hear it. The vertical axis is the percent of the time you heard it. Percent of the time you heard it. Okay? So pure tones like 1,000 hertz, 2,000 hertz, 4,000, they will have what you call steep performance index functions. In English, it means, look at the orange, it's a steep hill. I wouldn't want to ride my bike up that. Okay? That means if I present it below the threshold, you'll likely not hear it. If I present it at threshold, you'll usually hear it. And if I present it any above threshold, you'll always hear it. Okay? And that's the same thing for what we call, I moved a slide here, look, from here to here. And what I'm highlighting is this word. You are going to learn in speech. Now, Karen, are you doing speech audiometry where you are?
I have not done that yet.
Okay. When you do, one of your tests is going to be speech reception threshold. And that's the softest it takes to hear two-syllable words. And I'm going to define spondee by not sharing screen. Spondee means two-syllable words, and they're made up of two separate words. Hot dog, cowboy, birthday, sidewalk, cupcake. Okay, all those words, horseshoe, armchair, hardware. See how they're all made of two separate words. There's even emphasis on both syllables. Okay, those are called spondee words. And when you do speech testing, this first test you do is speech reception threshold. And you'll start out at a comfortable listening level for the guy, and you'll say, and I'll cover my face, say hardware. The guy, hardware. You'll go down by 10 dB. Birthday, birthday, down by 10 dB. Now, armchair, armchair, down by 10 dB. Sidewalk, I didn't get that one, up by 5 dB. Hardware, hardware, okay, down by 10 dB, up by 5. If the guy heard the words again at the same dB level, boom, threshold for hearing speech. The same ascending, descending procedures, although not with pure tones, but this time using spondee words. And though the level that you hear speech should agree, get this, this is cool, this is audiometry. It should agree, I'm going to move my slides back here. It should agree. If you could hear all the tones, let's say it took you about 50 decibels to hear the tones, you'd have a 50 decibel hearing loss. Chances are, when you read the person's spondee words, he would hear spondee words down to 50. His speech reception threshold, the softest it takes for him to hear speech, should agree with the softest it took for him to hear these three frequencies, 5, 1, and 2. 5, 1, and 2. 500. Look at the audiogram here before I stop sharing, okay? 5, 1, and 2. That's called your pure tone average. Sometimes I call it Parent Teachers Association, PTA, okay? Your pure tone average, if it is X, whatever that is, your speech reception threshold should also be X. If it doesn't, you don't know what you're doing, or your audiometer is out of calibration, or get this, your client is lying. This is how you catch liars. It's called malingerers, people who are faking a hearing loss. Their SRT, speech reception threshold, will not agree with their PTA, pure tone average. Just thought I'd let you know. You'll learn more about this in audiometry class. Don't worry about it. But just for now, that's an introduction. So look at this slide here, steep performance index for pure tone thresholds. Guess what? Same thing for spondee words. If your thresholds for speech is 15, if I read you the words at 10 dB, you're never going to get them. If I read the words to you at 20 dB, you're always going to get them. Okay? But they have to be spondees for this to occur. Because if they're not spondees, look what happened. Monosyllabic words. In other words, if I tried to play the same game saying, say the word cup, say the word clock, say the word road, you will not get the steep PI function. It will be different. It's going to be sloped. In other words, if I read the words to you at 15, you're barely going to get them. Look at that. Unlike spondees, you're usually, see? Spondee words was number 1. Single syllable words is number 2. If I read the words at 15, you're barely going to get them. I'm going to have to read the words at around 40 for you to just barely hear, for you to start getting them all the time. So that's why we have to use spondee words to find out the softest level you can hear speech. And it's got to agree with the pure tone average with which you hear speech. And why does that all work? Because the PI functions for spondees are just like the PI functions for pure tones. Now, people, this is more advanced audiometry. You can rest assured in IHS grads, International Hearing Society people, are not learning this. Who is learning this is AUD students at Missouri State University or University of Maryland, God knows what state. This is where audiology steps in. And they think you HISs don't know anything. Well, guess what? At OTC, I'm shoving it and I'm shoehorning it in there. Don't freak about it. We won't spend any more time on it, but we've had a little introduction to it. And that's what this section is at the top of page 3. That's all this is. Just describing what I talked to you about in writing. Okay? No, we won't spend any more time on that. Let's just leave it now. Have a sip of coffee here for a sec. We're halfway through our Zoom session. Look at that. We're moving right along, just doing just fine. So now I'm going to introduce you to 3 different dB references. Well, you know this one already. Met that guy a few weeks ago. You met this one last week and today. Okay, so DBHL, reference number 2, hearing level for humans. 0 dB on an audiogram. Flat line shows 0 dBHL. Corresponds to MAP. No need then to factor in different decibels of SPL at each frequency. The differences are built in. DBHL can be interpreted as dB hearing loss or dB hearing level, either one. 0 dBHL can mean 0 dB of hearing loss or 0 decibels hearing level. Normal adult hearing What's normal hearing on an audiogram? 25 decibels or less. So normal hearing, follow my cursor here. If a person's thresholds fall above where my cursor is moving back and forth, the person has essentially normal hearing. Children, it's a different matter. With children, we're more strict. With children, it's got to be at 15 or less. And can you guess why that might be the case? It's educationally significant. Children don't have a complete grasp of language yet. They need all the hearing they can get. So an educationally significant hearing loss for a child is 15 decibels or worse. A definable hearing loss for an adult is 25 dB or worse. So there you have it. Put a star by that. Okay? Close a section. Now look at number 3. SL. There's a third reference. And this one is for you in particular. For you in particular. Let's go back to the audiogram and define it. Let's say you can hear 1,000 hertz down to 0. If I present 1,000 hertz to you at 50, you hear that at a sensation level of 50 because it's 50 decibels above your hearing threshold. But let's say you have a 25 dB hearing loss at 1,000 hertz, and I present the tone to you once again at 50. Now you hear it at a sensation level of 25. Because your threshold for the tone was 25. You couldn't hear till it was 25. And if I'm presenting the tone to you at 50, 50 minus 25 is 25. So when you think of sensation level, that's the number of decibels for some frequency above someone's threshold. So for example, if you can hear a tone at 0, if a tone is presented at 60 dBHL, the person hears that same tone at 60 dBSL. And another example, if a person can't hear the tone until it's 50, and then if the tone is presented at 60, the person hears it at a sensation level of 10, because 60 minus 50 is 10. Now, we don't use sensation level very often. We mostly use SPL and HL. SPL we use for hearing aids, and HL we use for humans. But here's one way you could look at it. SPL is for the world, HL is for the human race, and SL is for you. It's kind of like, okay? Anyway, that's just a short introduction to 3 different references for the decibel from hell. Unit 2 was all about dBSPL. Unit 4, we got into dBHL, and we quickly defined dBSL. But again, SL is not used all that often. Audiometers. Put a star by this. Karen knows what this is because she's in the field, but many of us aren't. So, audiometers, that's the equipment used to test human hearing. Different dBSPLs at each frequency are built in and calibrated each year. In other words, MAP is built in, and the audiometer is calibrated each year. This is an important one. There's 2 kinds of headphones. One kind of headphone fits around your ear. It's called circumaural. It's often called TDH39 or TDH49. Don't ask me why, that's just what they're called. Or you can be testing with insert headphones. Insert headphones fit all the way inside the ear canal. They are more common, more sanitary because you're changing the tips. Less need for masking the good ear to keep it busy while you're testing the bad ear. We won't worry about that here and now, but they are often called ER-3A. All right, each headphone requires different calibration, so the person coming in to calibrate your audiometer knows all about this. Here's something you should know. You really can't switch headphones on an audiometer. In other words, unplug a set of headphones from one audio and just plug it into yours. Audiometers are calibrated as a unit with the headphones. So your audiometer is calibrated with circumaural headphones that fit over your ears, and they're calibrated with the particular set of circumaural headphones that you happen to be using, not another set, the particular set. And they are often calibrated with the insert headphones, and again, the particular set of insert headphones that came with that audiometer. They are calibrated as a unit, so that the various decibels across the frequencies all equal minimal audible pressure, and so that your 0 dBHL really does accurately represent what it's supposed to represent. You need to get audiometers calibrated each year. It comes like a sticker, like on your license plate. You got to get it done each year. Now let's move on down the page to binaural hearing. Binaural hearing. Why do we have 2 ears? We're almost finished Unit 2. I should say Unit 4, just about. Binaural hearing, hearing with 2 ears. Here's your readings on it. Lass and Woodford, Chapter 5 and Chapter 6, another little section on it. Not long, but do look at it. Now look, you're going to see some really weird things. Superior olivary complexes. Look at that line. We haven't covered that yet in Anatomy 120. Just for now, they are little tiny sets of cells inside your brainstem. Okay, they are auditory cells inside your brainstem. That's what they are. So your 8th nerve, as it leaves the cochlea and it courses through to the brain, it meets up with the SOC, superior olivary complex. No, they don't look like olives too much. I'm not sure if they have pimentos, whether they're green olives or black olives, but that's what they're called. Okay, you have one on one side, one on the other side, but the SOCs, superior olivary complexes, now put a star by this, that's the first place where crossover occurs. Crossover. In other words, that's the first place where the right ear can get information comparing what the left ear got. And the left ear can get information from what the right ear got. That's the first set of cells in your body that gets information from both ears. Now think about this. The right cochlea only gets information from the right middle ear. And the right middle ear only gets information from the right outer ear. The right 8th nerve only gets information from the right cochlea, right middle ear, and right ear canal. Okay? But when you get to the SOCs, that's where the proverbial crap hits the fan. Because now that right SOC gets information from both ears. And the left SOC gets information from both ears. And what they are doing is comparing. What do you got? What do I got? What do you got? What do I got? What I got's better than what you got. Mine's better than what you got. Why am I saying this? Because 2 ears are required to hear direction. Here's how it works. It's not like this ear hears from there and this ear hears from here. No way. It's better than that. If I'm talking and my ear is facing you, and my head is facing this way, the sound from your voice is going to hit this ear a split second before it hits my other ear. That's because my right ear here is covered or is shaded by 10 pounds of ugly fat, known as my head. Okay? So if you're talking, your voice is going to hit this ear a split second before it gets here. That's how I localize the direction of low frequency sounds, because lows bend. So the sound hitting my left ear, and then it's got to bend around my head to get to my good ear. Now this is happening at 766 miles an hour, the speed of sound, but still, your SOCs are comparing the time of arrival of the sound in order to localize low frequency sounds. Why low? Because lows bend, highs bounce. How do you localize the direction of high frequency sounds? I'll put my head in the same way here again. Karen's talking to me. Her voice is going to be a little bit louder to my left ear than it will to my right ear because my left ear is closer. So high frequencies, the cue for localizing high frequencies is tiny intensity differences. Why can't my SOCs use time differences? Because high frequency waves are short and they can't bend around my head. They're not long enough. So my SOCs are forced to rely on a different cue, and that cue is tiny intensity differences between the ears. That's how we localize the direction of sound. Your little tiny SOCs are comparing two things: time of arrival, tiny intensity differences. And those tiny interaural differences, inter being between, aural being A-U-R-A-L, ear, inter-ear differences, tiny little inter-ear time differences and tiny little inter-ear intensity differences are the cues that our body uses. What part of the body? SOCs in the brain stem. Okay, those are the cues we use to localize the direction of sound. That is the main reason we have two ears. Main reason. Okay, localization of the direction of sound. If you have one ear, you have nothing to compare. Your SOCs can't compare anything. So the one-eared person can hear just fine. He's just going, where the hell are you? If he sees you, fine. But otherwise, if you're calling from another room or calling from a place he can't see, if you're out in the woods and you yell to the person who's got one ear, he'll go, I can hear you. Where are you? Can't tell. He has no way of localizing the direction of sound. That's the main reason you got two ears. Pretty weird, huh? So let's go to your notes here and to your good old PowerPoint, and let's see what we can lie about here. Okay. Oh yeah, here's a picture of it. Okay, here's a guy. He's facing the front, and there's sound from a speaker coming from one side. Now, schematic diagram of a sound source on an azimuth plane around the head, whatever. Distance of the sound from the ears is the range. The sound reaches the right ear first, and thus there is an interaural difference in the arrival time. And the sound at the left ear is also less intense than the sound at the right ear, leading to an interaural level difference or intensity difference. So in terms of time, there's a difference. Look at this wave here is later than this wave here. And also this wave is softer than this wave here. You got two things that are different, the time and the intensity. And time is used to localize the direction of low frequency sounds. Intensity differences are used to localize the direction of highs. So now, before I go to this slide, we'll just show you in your notes where we are. Recall, the SOC is the first nucleus to receive info from both ears. Info from both ears gets compared, blah, blah, blah. Decussation, there's that word, crossover. Don't worry so much about acoustic reflex. Oh yeah, look at the acoustic reflexes that you learned in the middle ear. In Unit 2, I think, in your 120. Your acoustic reflex arc also involves these SOCs. Loud sounds to one ear causes an acoustic reflex in both ears because there's crossover happening at that level. So the acoustic reflex arc also involves the SOCs. See? And you'll learn much more about this as we wind on to the end of our anatomy class when we cover the eighth nerve and the central auditory nervous system. That'll be at the very end of your course. It's the last unit, and we will cross this way again. Okay? For now, don't worry about it. Binaural terms Azimuth, I don't care. Interaural, well, you know what that means, between ears. Monotic, sound presented to one ear. Diotic, identical stimuli to both ears. Dichotic, different stimuli to each ear. Memorize those. Dichotic especially. Dichotic is a test. Now, we've all experienced dichotic listening. It's really aggravating. Think of a cousin that's arriving from out of town, and the cousin isn't quite sure how to find your house. So the cousin pulls his car over to the side of the road and phones you, saying, hey, okay, I'm at the outskirts of town. Where are you? Well, what you got to do is you got to take this road, and then your wife goes, no, that's the wrong way. Tell him he's got to go. So you're hearing him on the phone, but you're hearing competing sound that's different in the other ear. You're going, ah. Okay, it's not pleasant. Dichotic listening is used to test children for learning disabilities. They'll put dichotic digits into the ears of the child, and they will ask the child to repeat the digits that he or she heard. And they will not be they will be different digits at the same time. 8, 8 and 1, the kid has to repeat what he heard. You're testing for learning disabilities with dichotic digits. We as HISs don't do this. Audiologists do. They have a whole course on what they call central auditory processing dysfunction. In other words, the brain, auditory areas of the brain. Not the ear, but the brain. In other words, you're not testing a child's hearing ability, you're testing a child's listening ability. I get told this all the time. You can hear, you just don't listen. Okay? Can you focus? What's your attention that you're paying to the sound that your ears are giving the brain? So anyway, all these things have contexts. The purpose of this course is just to give you some definitions of this stuff. Later on, when you hear about things again, you'll go, oh yeah, okay, been there. Here's another thing about dichotic, okay? Binaural summation. We've covered this already. 2 ears are better than 1. How much better? About 5 dB. And we covered that when we looked at the difference between MAF and MAP, okay? Binaural summation. If I can hear a tone of 10 dB in my right ear and a tone of 10 dB in my left ear, binaurally presented, the tone will be heard at 5. 2 ears are about 5 dB better than 1. Then we looked at number 2, the localization. Covered it already. Been there. Got the t-shirt. And when you're looking at number 3, here we go. Make sure you've got, for low frequencies, the Q is tiny time differences. For high frequency, the Q is tiny intensity differences. Low frequency localization and the time differences between the ears, you can always read that because we've covered it already. High frequency localization, we've covered this already. And that means the mid frequencies are the hardest to localize because your superior olivary complexes don't know which cue to use. They don't know whether to spin or wind their wristwatch, okay? Because you're at the meeting point of the differences between the 2 cues. Binaural beats, don't worry about it. Leave that alone. You can read it if you want, but I'm not going to ask you a darn thing about it, okay? I'll just leave it. Let's finish and look at number 4. Number 4 is important, and it's the binaural cocktail effect. Now, if you look at this carefully, and here's how we finish this unit. Cocktail effect. Let's go to our picture in PowerPoint. So you go to the picture in PowerPoint. Here you go. Here's one way of looking at it. Here's a picture I drew. If when you're listening in noise, you've got 4 things happening, just like my 4 fingers here. I've got the sound I want to hear in my right ear, the sound I want to hear in my left ear, in other words, the signal, the speech, And then I have competing noise in my right ear and competing noise in my left ear. So if you're standing there at a party and you're a yard away from somebody and you want to hear the person's talking to you, you've got the cocktail effect. You're hearing the person's voice, but you're also hearing the background noise. That's what I mean by, now look at the top head. Signal, noise, signal, noise. But notice one of the signals is written in italics. The other ones are all regular. If there is something out of phase or something different in the signal to both ears, as there is likely to be because of this, okay? Because of this slide, there's likely to be a signal difference. So if there's something different in the signal, either slight intensity differences, slight time differences, you're going to be happy. You'll hear the signal pretty good. And on the other hand, look at the second head down. The signals are identical, but this time one of the noises is written in italics. That means there's something different in the noise between the ears. Then you're also still happy, okay? But look when you're unhappy, or look, I should say, look when you're happy again. Look at this. If the noise is identical in the third head, right, the middle head, the noise is identical, and the signal's only in one ear. Huh, well then, there's something different too. So all three heads at the top have something different, either in the signal or in the noise. But what's so weird about the middle head? That's the one where I'll stop sharing and I'll describe a pilot flying a little Cessna plane. And if you've ever flown in a little Cessna airplane, it's like a Volkswagen with wings. I mean, it's loud. Let's say the pilot is trying to listen to the tower, and the pilot has headphones on. And come in, please. We want to land. We want a taxi for a landing. Many times the noise of the cockpit is very loud, and the guy's trying to hear the speech from the tower through his headphones. Do you know what the pilot will often do? The pilot will often take off one headphone and just listen with one headphone. Guess what? He hears the tower better. Okay? Why? Because there's something different in the signal to the ears. And that's the picture of the middle page, okay? Or the middle face there. Then look at the two unhappy faces. The second from the bottom, everything's identical. He's not happy. And look at the bottom face. He's deaf in one ear. So he's not happy either, okay? Cocktail effect means you're listening to the speech in background noise. And we have two ears for the cocktail effect. It increases the signal to noise ratio. You can hear speech better in noise if you've got two ears than if you've got one ear. You hear speech better in noise because there's things that are different to the ears. Either the signal is going to be different to the ears or the background noise is going to be different to the ears. And as long as there's something different in either the signal or the noise, you've got a benefit given to you by means of the cocktail effect. You will hear better in noise. Whereas if the signal and the noise are all identical to both ears, as in the second from the bottom head here, you're going to be unhappy. Or if you've only got one ear, you're going to be unhappy because you can't compare ears. There's no, you don't get the benefit of the cocktail effect. So the three things we need to summarize about the benefits of having two ears: 1, binaural summation; 2, localization of the direction of sound; and 3, the cocktail effect. The same thing as I could show you this picture here, and that this is in your slides too, of course. It's shown here. Look at the three heads. Right ear, left ear. Top head, same noise, same pure tone to both ears. Tone detection is poor. Middle head, pure tone is inverted in one ear, the phase. Tone detection's good. Look at the bottom one. Pure tone is removed from one ear. Tone detection again is good. That's like my third head here. Okay, that's like the pilot who takes off one headphone, and listens to the tower coming through his one headphone. Okay, essentially that finishes Unit 4, Psychoacoustics. There we go. Covered lots of stuff, but it has more meaning, a little bit more clinical relevance to real life and hearing loss. It should. That's what psychoacoustics is, perceptions of sound. We move now a little bit more to the realities of our field. The first half of this course was just what the heck is sound? What is frequency? What's the decibel? What's speech? What's noise? Okay, now how do we hear? How do we hear, my dears? Okay, that's it for me. I will clock off and come on back to talk to you about some lies in 120 anatomy. All right, I shall stop the recording now.
Thank you.
Hey, hey.